Hello, my name is Heidi Andrea Restrepo Rhodes, and I'm a queer, neuroqueer, disabled, brown Latina writer and scholar. For visual description, I am brown-skinned with dark short hair, currently wearing dangly brass-colored earrings, 2 gold nose rings, and a black sleeveless top. Behind me are a surfboard, some plants, books, and abstract artwork. As a content notice, I would like you to know that this capsule makes reference to ableism in order to contrast and describe an aspect of disability justice. In this capsule, I also use the word crip, which derives from the word crippled and has historically been used as a slur by people who are not disabled, but has been reclaimed by a growing number of people in disability justice work and writing. The poetry capsule I'm sharing with you is an offering of excerpts from poems by 2 award-winning neurodivergent poets of color. The first poem is by J. Michael Martinez, whose newest collection, Tarta Americana, was released in September 2023 with Penguin Random House. The second is by Khadijah Queen, whose most recent collection, Anodyne, was released in 2020 with Tin House. Both poems I've chosen for this capsule address experiences of neurodivergence, variations in neurological functioning that are different from what is medically or socially considered the norm or neurotypical. First, I would like to share a quote from Sins Invalid, a disability justice-based performance project that incubates and celebrates artists with disabilities, centering artists of color and LGBTQ and gender variant artists. Sins Invalid tells us that, quote, all bodies are unique and essential. All bodies are whole. All bodies have strengths and needs that must be met. We are powerful, not despite the complexities of our bodies, but because of them. End quote. In other words, rather than accepting the idea that a normal body and mind exists, an idea that has been at the center of eugenics thinking, a disability justice framework insists that instead that humans exist in vast diversity of neurological wiring and bodily experience, and that this diversity is vital to a thriving society. Both works I am sharing confront ableist forces of normalization to carve out space for the beauty and vibrant possibility neurodivergence brings to our lives through attuning us to the world in unexpected ways. It feels important that these poems are by poets of color, given that most representations of neurodivergence center white men. The particular intersections of race and neurodivergence, while not explicitly explored here, are nonetheless never absent. I also find that poetry is a genre of writing that especially lends itself well to neurodivergent expression and what I like to call our crip and disabled grammars. If normative grammar is about the prescriptions we are given for the correct use of language, both poetry and crip grammars lend themselves to language being made anew, defying the notion that there is any one correct form for body and word. To begin with, I will read an excerpt from J. Michael Martinez's poem, Letter Number 9, from the poem series of Letters to Richie, in his new book, Tarta Americana. The poems in this series are addressed to the late Chicano musician, Richie Valens. This is from letter number 9. At that time, I didn't know the terms neurodiverse, Agent Orange, or synesthesia, or how deeply sensitive to all stimuli my flesh is. But music and writing have always been twin consolations to the noise. However, instead of practicing guitar and singing Richie, during my re-education, I read hundreds of books of poetry and philosophy. My younger brother, always the kindest and most compassionate of us, would go to the library to retrieve the list of books given him by his brooding older brother. Because Richie, the first 5 months of treatment, my skin erupted all over my body, head to toe, ballooning up as the drug refabricated my skin, and the doctor saying, "It is just a unique response. We don't know why." Prescribing antidepressants, at midnight staring into the bathroom mirror, I would shake my head, Richie, crying quietly, "This isn't me. This isn't me." Over and over again, until how many silent months later, swung, gripping a promise tight in my hands like some rope bridge swinging over a chasm. This vow to a young man whose promise had already drowned in blood that I'd swallowed, which daily flowered in me, 1,000 petals suddenly crying awake. And Richie, one day I looked up and saw not my skin, but the patterns of my days, the recurring designs my thoughts took when my was mying. And I laughed, Richie. I could only laugh with the spirals, and soon my self-refusal curled shrimp small knowingly into a stoic but steadfast chum. Just one of so many vice voices, and Richie, soon joy was where the walls fall, tongue, unyielding, abandoned song singing. Next, I will read an excerpt from Khadijah Queen's Late Diagnosis, starting with a tweet. The entirety of the poem can be found at the website for the University of Arizona Poetry Center at poetry.arizona.edu. Late diagnosis, starting with a tweet. Chateau Cadebon, France, 2021. Trauma and astrology don't explain everything, but I've got PTSD and ADHD, and on a 13th Friday in June, halfway through the 70s, third planet in retrograde, I guess I was born to learn in reverse. A calendared planetary curse to pay the wrong kind of attention, a genius of distraction, or a poet, extrasensory, human. My chaos is more glitter than concrete, more confetti than anything solid or obedient to shape. Where do thoughts fly? Associative leaps, when I knew what to call them, felt like home, like wings. It makes sense to live in the air, to refuse to live a life of almost. And later in the poem, certain brains wander, limbic, led by feeling, flight, light, surrender to love, curiosity, or nothing but speed, pleasure, Formula One and richer, bolder, older reds I adore for a reason. I can't always follow instructions, but know to rectify mistakes. I believe it's less forgiveness than allowance, less madness and more the damage of false assumptions, less quirk and more dopaminic need, and neurological pattern in infinite exploding pieces. And I'm explaining again. I might or might not learn when to quit and how according to taste and circumstance, holding close what took time and art and an earth of chance to make. Both poems here contend with questions of how the self is remade in relationship to diagnosis and what might become possible for imagination, being, and relation if we refuse the limitations that purely medicalized frameworks of neurodivergence place on us. Both poets arrive to a place where, importantly, neurodivergence is not lack or failure, but a portal to possibilities for a life made of a unique and soaring music. For this writing prompt, I want to reiterate that in disability justice community work, many of us are committed to the idea that we are all neurodivergent in our own ways. And the idea of the neurotypical human is a fiction used for the social regulation of difference. I invite all listeners and viewers, regardless of how you identify, to explore in this writing prompt how your own body-mind expresses itself uniquely in the world. In order to do this, I invite you to write down answers to 3 questions. Feel free to pause this video in between each question to write. Number 1. Inspired by Khadijah Queen's poem, I ask you, how does your brain uniquely wander the world? Where and how do your thoughts fly? Number 2. What of your own ways of moving and being, thinking and feeling in the world have taken, as Khadijah Queen writes, time and art and an earth of chance to make? 3. There's a line in J. Michael Martinez's poem that says, I could only laugh with the spirals, and soon my self-refusal curled shrimp small knowingly into a stoic but steadfast chum, just one of so many vice voices, and Richie. Soon joy was where the walls fall, tongue, unyielding, abandoned song singing. Martinez is writing about releasing internalized ableism and internalized neuronormativity, expressing what we might understand as the joy in one's own deviating ways of being and knowing. So question number 3 is, if you could release any and all of the messages you've received in life that press you into the narrow, what walls would fall? What is the sound of your own unyielding, abandoned song singing? Craft a poem that weaves your responses to these questions. Thank you, Billy Sanders, for your ASL interpretation for this capsule, and thank you all for being with me here.